Well, welcome everyone. My name is Kim Hughes. I'm the director of the You Teach Institute here at UT Austin. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 16th annual You Teach STEM Educators Conference. This conference is being co-presented by our partners at the National Math and Science Initiative and the You Teach STEM Educators Association.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, so honored to have this opportunity to speak with all of you. I want to start by just reiterating what Kim said earlier. Yeah, we've all changed coming back after these few years. And it feels different. Even if you've been at this very conference before, it feels different because we're in this really powerful moment of reflection. A lot of us are coming out of this state of just being reactive, and now we're able to really say, like, okay, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We get to hit reset, get to reimagine, think about what do we need to do differently? What do we need to think about differently? And it's important because sometimes change is hard, and it's really compelling sometimes to be like, you know what, let's just keep going from where we were. Let's just keep moving. But that's not what this moment is about. After all, the theme is reconnecting with purpose. And really want to focus on that term with purpose, with reflection. And as we do that, it's also important that we consider this, that, given the time that we just went through, the experiences were different depending on what groups you belong to, groups you identify with, types of resources you had access to. All of that sort of collectively providing you with your level of inclusion in society. And depending on your level of inclusion in society, it's directly related to the level of vulnerability you have to trauma. So, as we think about these things, I want to focus on that term, inclusivity. What does it look like? How do we enact it? What are the things we need to keep in mind? That's going to be the foundation for our conversation today. And while we've all been working towards a lot of efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've been doing it for our students. And it's important that as we do that, we also consider, what does it look like for ourselves? What does that look like within our programs? What does that look like within our teams, within our departments? And the reason we need to do that, this quote by James Clear, we don't rise to our loftiest goals, but we fall to our most broken systems. We at You Teach have made great strides to focus on preparing teachers of color, all teachers to teach students of color, and all students. But we have to ask ourselves this: how can we adequately prepare and support all students if our systems might still be gatekeeping some of us? Supporting our students of color, supporting all students, producing more culturally responsive teaching, while still addressing the barriers that exist within our systems. Those are not separate things. And in a sense, you can't authentically do one without addressing the other. Because anything built on inauthenticity will collapse. So when we talk about innovation, when we talk about these big changes, these big goals, we have to ask ourselves this question: who is afforded that opportunity to innovate? Who gets that psychological safe space, that term from the research of Dr. Amy Edmondson? Who gets that psychological safe space to ask questions, to say, well, can we do this differently? And not have that be, some type of bold thing where they're stepping up and they're speaking and it's scary. No, where they can actually have that freedom to try things. It's okay if it doesn't work out. Who is able to do that? If we want our practices to speak towards and represent all of our students, then we need all of our voices empowered. I want to be clear about something here when I say that. I'm not saying this is not about giving the voice to the voiceless when I say that we need all our voices empowered. People aren't voiceless. People are not voiceless. What we have, though, is sometimes people in power who are earless to certain voices, and that is different. So when we consider creating this culture, this sense of belonging for everyone, can't really do that unless the people in power are taking accountability and responsibility for their actions, whether those actions be in enacting inclusion or those actions be in ensuring the lack thereof. And of course, we all have our systems and our areas of power. Whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a master teacher, advisor, co-director, we all have our areas of power. And I want you to think about whatever that setting is, where you have a little more power, a little more agency than other people in the room. Or maybe you have all the power and all of the agency. And I want you to ask yourself this very important question. What is it like for the least powerful person in the room? What is it like for them? I want us to think about that. And most of us in our field in education are familiar with the work around growth mindset, the work presented by Carol Dweck. In her book, Inclusion on Purpose, Rishika Tulshyan provides a framework that stems from growth mindset, but is leading towards an inclusion mindset. She provides a framework called the Bridge Framework. And I want to use that today to sort of guide our conversation as we look into this topic, as we really delve into it. The first step in the framework is be uncomfortable. Okay? So I want you to go back to that setting you were thinking of. You had a little more power, you had all the power. Think about times where in that setting, maybe you or someone else spoke over someone, interrupted someone because they could, because they had a little more of that agency. Maybe you could have stood up for someone, spoken up for someone who had less power, but you didn't in that moment. Maybe your power entitled you to put your name first on work that wasn't really yours, that you didn't really create. I want you to think about all of these tough questions. And as bad as it feels, as hard as it feels, feel it. Sit with it. This part is important. This part is important for all of us. And consider this, that feeling of uncomfortable. We talked about yesterday, uncomfortable conversations. We're really going towards uncomfortable confrontations. That feeling of uncomfortable, those of us who are minoritized or othered, we've been uncomfortable for a long time already. We have already been doing the mental gymnastics all the time in our mind of, how should I phrase this? How should I present this? Is this okay? Did I come off too aggressive? Will I come off as being angry? We are constantly having to, should I sideline myself? Constantly having to do that. So yeah, it's uncomfortable, welcome to it. It's the step one, as hard as it is. Something else that comes up when we talk about being uncomfortable, It's this conversation around biases, right? And I don't know if you've heard this, I know I've heard this often. People will often bring up biases and then say, I have mine, but you have yours, and we all have our biases. Like, yeah. And then sometimes that's just kind of left as the ending of that. Like, okay, so we've all got them, we have that in common, cool. But check this out. Depending on the amount of power and privilege you have, your biases are a lot more dangerous than others. They are not all equal. So if you, thank you. So if you are the person in power, yeah, everyone else might have them too, but you got to figure yours out. Because your biases could not only ruin someone's career, they could ruin someone's life. All this research coming out, from MIT Sloan and other places about toxic work environments, great resignation. One of the top factors that leads to a toxic work environment is the lack of inclusivity. People don't leave that at work. That feeling of being devalued, of being othered, of being disrespected, you don't leave that at work. It follows you home. It impacts your mental health, anxiety, depression. It impacts your relationship with your family. It impacts your physical health. It'll show up on your physical with your doctor because it follows you everywhere. So yes, we all have them, but no, they are not all equal. And then as we start to think about our own biases, we also have to reflect on what we don't know. So, as was mentioned, I work at the University of Houston. Very fortunate to do that, yeah. It's always the first or second most diverse university in this country. That means I have the opportunity to work alongside with people from all different backgrounds. And yet when I think about this work, when I get into this work, and this might be true for a lot of you, I tend to focus on my shared identities. I tend to look at the experience from my shared identities, which for me, woman, person of color, and immigrant. But I also acknowledge, and have to acknowledge, that even within those shared identities, my experiences as a woman of color, are different than the experiences of my colleague who shared those shared identities as woman, person of color, but are Black. Those experiences are different because I have certain privileges, and I have to acknowledge that and be aware of that. Something that's not in any professional bio. I was born in Pakistan, and I immigrated with my family to Texas when I was 9 years old. Grew up in Houston, specifically in Alief, southwest Houston. Grew up in an area predominantly Black at the time, predominantly low income as well. And even though I was rode the same buses, lived in the same apartment complexes, same schools, same classes, same teachers as my Black peers, still started to notice that there was some difference in how I was treated. Sometimes it was that sort of shield and also eventual burden of being viewed as the model minority. And then, while I was in school, 9/11 happened. And my life, my experience, how I was talked to, things that were said to me, things that were said to my parents as Muslims in this country, changed. Suddenly, my lived experiences were once again different than those of my peers who didn't have that shared identity. I say all that to say, there is so much we don't know about the lived experiences of people who do not share our identities. And it is on us to say, okay, whose lived experience do I not know about? And then do the work to learn it. Don't leave it up to them to educate you, right? That's not on them. It's yours to do. Whose do you need to learn more about? And then do that work and get started. And actually, as I am talking about lived experience, do want to pause here for a moment and really emphasize the importance of it. So this conference looks different, not just because we are all changed, but because we also have people who weren't here with us the last time we were here in person. This year we have the honor and the privilege of having classroom teachers here with us. So can I just ask, if you're a classroom teacher, please stand up so we can recognize you. Thank you so much for being here. And can I just say, any session that you go into, any session that you choose to engage in, please share your voice, share your tacit knowledge. We need it. We need to listen. You know, we're also grateful that in this community, we also have some renowned researchers. But I gotta tell y'all, lived experience carries more weight than research. You're the one living it, you're the one doing it. Your voice is central and key to everything that is taking place. So welcome to the You Teach conference. We're really grateful to have you. And as I talk about lived experience carrying more weight, we are also joined today by our new friends and colleagues from 3 historically Black colleges and universities who are with us today. If you are here with an HBCU, can you also please stand up? Can I say, HBCUs, while comprising about 3% of the universities in this country, produce 25% of Black majors, STEM majors, 25%. It's more than a lot of our programs, more than a lot of our programs combined. And as we know, as Dr. Green even shared about his own personal history with us, 40% of Black students who go on to pursue a doctoral degree got started at an HBCU as well. So once again, is our opportunity to really experience that cultural humbleness, really say this is an opportunity for us to collaborate, for all of us to learn, and for all of us to grow together. So thank you for providing us with that. And as we learn and grow together, another piece in the framework, another opportunity for that, is inviting feedback. Thinking back to where we are in our role of power, classroom teacher, advisor, master teacher, co-director, whatever it might be for us. In what ways are we truly inviting feedback on how we might be perpetuating biases? Again, in what ways are we inviting feedback on how we might be perpetuating biases? What does that look like? And if that's never happened before, there's some things to keep in mind, right? If you're doing that for the first time, that's okay. Some things that you have to ask yourself in order to invite true feedback on something like this. Well, you've got to be prepared to hear some things that aren't going to feel good. You know, it's hard. It's hard to hear that something you did hurt someone. Something that you did made someone feel a certain way. That's really hard. But do it anyway. All right? Do that work anyway. And do it with intentionality. Your intentions around this matter. So you've got to ask yourself when you're doing this, is this really just to check loyalty? Just to see where people are? Is this a one and done thing? You know, like we did it, we got there, done. You know, kind of like when we've seen sometimes efforts around diversity. All right, we've got them, we've got the people, check. Okay, but what is it like for them now that they're there? So is this something that once you do receive the feedback, you are willing and ready to take action, to do something with that feedback. I also want to just make the side note that if this isn't something that's commonly done, keep in mind, people of color are often both hypervisible and invisible at the same time. So don't collect data that can come back and jeopardize their future. If this is not a part of something that's regularly done, do it in a way where people feel safe to share these things, because maybe that psychological safety doesn't quite exist yet. And that might be the thing that you discover from the feedback. Then as that feedback comes in, defensiveness doesn't help. So, I mentioned that this framework comes from the growth mindset. We know that in growth mindset, you learn from your mistakes, right? You make it right. You do the things that you need to do in order to make it right. It's a little bit harder and a little bit different when we're talking about an inclusivity mindset, though. Because that defensiveness, that looks a little different. It's not just saying that I don't want to do this. That's not really how it looks. Defensiveness can look like gatekeeping. It can look like gatekeeping people who speak up, right? Oh, okay, you're going to do this. You're going to branch out on your own. You're going to say these things. You're no longer invited to these opportunities for growth. It can look like retaliation. People in power, power begets power, have access to other people in power. It can look like retaliation. And in the end, all of it really is defensiveness in that moment, is just that entitlement to that power, not wanting to let that go because it benefits you as that person in that moment. So that defensiveness can also be purposeful in keeping the structures in place. But can I say that if the goal, if that intention is to actually move towards that safe space, move towards that inclusivity for everyone, then that defensiveness is not going to be productive. It's not going to help if that is in fact the goal that we're working towards. Then expect that change takes time. It's not just a one-time thing. It's not just a one-time check. It takes time. You're not going to uncover all of it the first time you look for it. You're not going to be able to address all the issues the first time you start. You're going to make some mistakes, right? We talked about even that yesterday, but you have to start somewhere. But know that it takes time, it takes intention, and it takes authenticity as well. Talked about at the start, moving from the state of reactiveness. A couple of years ago, all of a sudden, these task forces start coming up, these committees are everywhere, and there's just so much going on. And it could feel very reactive. Now we have this opportunity to step back and say, okay, what do we want to focus on? What are the things that we don't know? There's a lot of it. What are we going to focus on? What does that look like? There's a session tomorrow, as was shared. We're now imagining the next 10 years of the You Teach STEM Educators Association. And it's important that voices with that tacit knowledge, with that lived experience, be center to that conversation. It's important that all of our voices, because we all have different lived experiences to contribute, all of them be a part of this conversation. This is not the only opportunity. There's so many others that will be shared with you throughout the conference. But I did want to say and did want to encourage that we do need you to be a part of this. And we look forward to having you in that capacity. Here's the thing. If we do this work right now, this hard work, if we meet this moment, and it says it right there, DEI is not just a moment. For a lot of us who have been othered, who are minoritized, this is our entire life. This is not just a moment for us. But if we do this work right now, then those students of ours, the ones who are disproportionately impacted by trauma, the ones who, not going to say underrepresented, because that doesn't really tell the full story, right? Those who are excluded, who've been left out, who've been marginalized, who have been underestimated, those students, yours and mine, they will one day be able to look at these structures of power, be able to look at these people of power and say to themselves, why not me? And you know what? They won't have to claw their way to the table. They won't have to bring their own chair to the table, because let's be honest, that invite never came. They won't have to do that, because we will have done right by them. We will have done the hard work to create those psychological safe spaces that result in that innovation. We will have done that. So yeah, let's do that. Let's come back change, and let's own every bit of this transformation. Because why not us? And why not now? Thank you so much for having me.